in March 2025, Gong released a new research about the science between talk ratios and winning sales conversations in 2025. And I mean, every data is questionable, but let's say that Gong is a pretty solid and useful data and research lab to be used. And apparently the new talk to listen ratio, the new successful one, measures that in closed won deals, there is a consistency among all the sellers who talk for at least 57% of the time. Now, the main question is not how they talk, how they speak, but what happens in the other 43%. So what happens when salespeople listen? And this is why I'm happy to, let's say, welcome as a guest Rebecca Shafir, who probably wrote one of the most successful book on listening, the Zen of Listening, and who has supported a lot of salespeople, a lot of companies in developing their listening skills. So happy to have you on the show, Rebecca.
Thank you, Toby. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Rebecca, just I know that most of the people in the audience are probably already familiar with your work, but if you want to share with you a little bit of your, let's say, career path, your professional history, your clinical practice, and how you turned it into also a business, let's say, consulting company.
Certainly. Well, I started off as a speech and language pathologist. I was working in hospital settings, and I noticed that patient outcomes, for example, just like our client outcomes, are very much dependent upon the relationship between a physician and a patient. You know, I have many salespeople who consider them physicians, financial or sales therapists with their clients. But what I noticed working in the medical field is that listening was absolutely essential for positive outcomes. It was also a major concern for risk management, that liabilities were very strong for physicians who had poor communication skills. So I was asked to create a seminar for physicians, managers, C-suite executives on listening. So I went right at it and I did a lot of research. And all I could find, Tobia, was a lot of information on what is called active listening. Your audience may be very familiar with that because that's what's taught in most businesses. But what I didn't like about it was that it was very inauthentic. It was a collection of tactics for making the person feel like they have been heard. And I thought it was manipulative and kind of phony. How can you possibly really understand someone and, from a sales perspective, understand what people's needs are and how to create a relationship if you're worried about leaning forward, nodding sufficiently, mirroring the person's posture and gestures? Really, the brain cannot do both well. So I said, I'm going to create a more authentic approach. And thereby, I created the seminar. I did a lot of research. I interviewed some of the best listeners from all industries to see how they do it. How do they create such strong relationships with their clients and their customers or their patients? And they all shared certain qualities. And that's how I came upon the components of what I call a mindful listener. That's it in a nutshell right there.
And thank you so much for the answer. And let me just share how, let's say, got to know you, your practice, your business, because I read your book in 2019. And that was pretty crazy because I read the book and I thought, oh, I got a new book that is out. But actually, it's the second edition because the first edition was written in 2000. So there have been several editions of the book. But The structure is pretty much the same because it seems that even if, let's say, we change the setting of the communications, the key skills to succeed at listening stay the same. But
Mm-hmm.
the first question I have for you is really what changed 25 years later, and what kind of concepts are, let's say, still practical and still applicable nowadays?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know something you asked about that when we spoke the first time is how does my approach endure? And my answer to that is that as long as human connection is relevant, mindful listening will endure. What has changed are the amount of distractions. Social media is a big one, but just the general state of the world, so many things, has become a real impediment to people being able to do the number one thing you need to do when you're listening, and that is to be able to lock in to the person you're listening to and to eliminate or at least put in the back of your mind your internal distractions, you're wanting to pick up your phone, you're wanting to check the news, you're wanting to get the interview over as soon as possible or the conversation so you can get to the next thing. That's a big one. Plus the external distractions. We're busier. There's much more in our visual field that gets in the way of our ability to connect with people versus perhaps back in the early 2000. There's even talk that our attention span has dwindled quite a bit. There are no solid numbers on that. I see everything from an attention span being gone from a minute to 20 seconds to maybe it's more like 10 seconds now before you start thinking of other things. So that's the major change in the last 25 years, I would say, Tobia.
And thank you for the answer. So I think it also overlaps with the inability to focus, maybe.
Very
So
much so.
yeah, a lot of multitasking going around, a lot of switch between screens and tasks that probably jeopardize our ability to connect with the other person, as you said.
Exactly. You nailed it. That's
So
right.
I think that let's start a little bit with what I found brilliant from your book. I mean, the book by itself is really, really practical, which makes it strange if you consider that it came in the early 2000s, and let's say that the main idea by that time, if I read some books of 25 years ago, was to really write a book to sell the course or to sell the consultants, like the consulting hours and so on. That is really practical and gives like a real practical approach since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
One of the concepts that I found extremely, extremely interesting is the ability to, listen to ourselves. So
Yes.
in your books, there are two chapters called really listening to ourselves, which were and still are pretty new for a book on listening. So, and I think this overlaps a little bit with what you said before. But before I ask any question, I don't know if you really wanna share something about this chapter as an introduction for the audience.
Oh, certainly. Well, keep in mind, Tobia, there are four aspects, four components of being a mindful listener. And in response to your question, I will address the fourth component, which is listening to ourselves. And then we can perhaps go back to the other three components because they very much um, are the foundation for being able to listen to yourself. Let me give you an acronym. Let me give your audience an acronym for how we need to listen to ourselves better. I tell my coachees, the people who I coach, to watch out for RAID. R as in RAID. R stands for rambling. These are the things that disconnect a conversation, that affect the relationship. Rambling, watch out for you going on and on and on about something and losing your listener. A, advice giving. Advice giving that has not been prompted by your speaker. I, interruption. People hate to be interrupted. There is a difference between interrupting and overlapping. Like there are many cultures that when you're having a conversation, the speaker and the listener kind of jockey back and forth, but they're adding to the essence of the conversation. That's called overlapping. But interruption is actually stopping your speaker in their tracks and shifting the conversation to something else or adding superfluous information. Interruption is one of the worst, the most common complaint of conversationalists. And then D is denial. That's a nasty one. Denying your speaker their reality. Saying things like, oh, that's not so bad, or boy, you could have it worse, or gee, don't worry about it, it'll be okay. Sometimes that is comforting in small bits, but it is really denying the customer or your client what they're experiencing, and that's a big turnoff. So if we can just pay attention to avoiding RAID, R for rambling, A for advice giving that's not prompted, I for interruption, and D for denial, whoa, that right there is a challenge. Listening to yourself is probably the most difficult component of being a mindful listener, but it's essential to forging a good connection with someone.
Thank you. And I think that the denial is extremely important, or at least this is why and how I found it important. It's because most of the time I used denial to really offer a kind of, as you said, relief.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not the right way of like, look, like really communicating this, because I was basically killing someone else's perception of the problem, or I was getting rid of any type of empathy, because after denial, what happens is, problem solving. So that's what I found. Like I go into denial. Okay, I tell you that your problem or whatever else you're sharing with me is not that negative. It will not affect your situation. And then I offer you a solution. So it was a disaster. So then this is one of the things I learned from your book that I just wanted to share. But no,
Good point.
no, but really helped me not only in the work but also outside of the work, because we as human beings, and without genderizing the argument, we as men tend to go into problem solving mode pretty
Mm-hmm.
quickly. So this is something I have to thank you
And
for.
at times we love you for it, but not all the time.
Sometimes there is no way that it can be helpful. Anyway, no, but thank you so much for this. And my questions were really based on the concept of listening to ourselves, because what I got from your book was the concept of the preparation for listening,
Mm-hmm.
which is totally different from preparation in terms of due diligence before sales call. So making the research or get the insights, read the news
Mm-hmm.
to kind of direct the conversation. Can you share a little bit more about this idea of preparation for listening to
Sure.
ourselves?
And Tobia, what I'll do in order to answer that question, let me quickly go through the first three components, the first three pieces of what it means to be a mindful listener. Remember, listening to ourselves is the fourth component. And then I can better answer your question. It'll make more sense.
Sure.
Number one, to be a mindful listener. And what do these mindful listeners do so well? They are able to take in the whole message, not just the words, but the facial expressions, the pauses, the nonverbal information that's coming at you like a fire hose when someone is speaking. Okay, so they're very good at that. Number two, these mindful listeners are able to sustain their attention over time. They are able to notice when internal distractions are starting to get in the way. They're able to shut out external distractions. They turn off their computer, they shut the door, they do whatever they can in order to maintain solid concentration time and focus, like you mentioned earlier. Number three, the other thing that a mindful listener does is they are able to make a speaker feel valued and respected for their position. So, number four being listening to ourselves. Now you're asking me, what preparation do we need to do in order to become a mindful listener? Yes, is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, so I've kind of answered it in a bit, but we need some ways to improve our ability to lock into the speaker, to concentrate and focus and maintain that focus for a duration that's reasonable, up into a half an hour or more as needed. And to do the other things as well, to make someone feel valued and respected, and also be able to have the conscientiousness to listen to ourselves when it's our turn to speak. What are the preparations? Number one, I tell people to consider starting to meditate. Now, meditation used to be kind of a soft, fuzzy kind of thing that only Buddhists and monks did. That was back in the 2000s. It was kind of a new notion. But it has been proven to become a very good tool for improving your ability to concentrate and focus. Because if you've ever meditated before, and do you meditate, Tobia? Have you ever tried it?
I have to be honest. I tried with my mom. It didn't work.
It's very challenging, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's not for everybody. There's other ways. But the research has shown with practice, starting even with 1 minute or 5 minutes, and then building up to what they consider to be, I like to call it industrial strength meditation, 20 to 30 minutes in which your mind is centered on one point, on a mantra or whatever. And what you're doing, it's a form of brain training actually, to help you notice when your mind has gone off track. So, have you ever had it happen when you're listening to a client and you start thinking about other things? Are you able to bring yourself back to centering in on your customer? This is what meditation trains the brain to do. But you've got to start small, and you've got to start with a form of meditation that works better for you to make it successful. But I highly recommend it because it can be so efficient as it relates to a conversation. That's one way. The other way is something that I call the movie mindset. And I talk about it a lot in the book. People love this. I still get emails from all over the place saying, yeah, the movie mindset did it for me. Because mindful listening, Tobia, is a mind shift. It's not a skill. It's not a tool. I don't even consider it an art. I consider it self-mastery, a form of self-mastery for you to be able to shift your mind to a place where it's just you and your speaker. So the movie mindset helps you get into that realm. People will say, I'm a terrible listener. And I say, okay, all right, let me ask you this. Have you ever gone to the movies? And they say, oh, sure. Well, who hasn't gone to the movies, Toby? I think that'd be about, I'd like to think 99% of the population. And they say, oh, yeah, I go to the movies. I totally forget myself. I forget my agenda. I leave all my worries in the parking lot or somewhere else. And I'm locking in to the movie. And I'm trying to relate to the characters. I'm trying to understand what motivates them to do what they're doing. And I'm hardcore locked in to what's going on in that movie. I say, well, that's exactly the kind of mind shift you need to have with your customer. You need to get into their movie. And then, oh, okay, I can relate to that. So the movie mindset is a mind shift that we're all capable of, and it works quite nicely. That's a form of preparation before you go into a conversation with a customer. Does that make sense to you, Tobia?
Absolutely. And this really links to my next question, because I think that you partially answered it already, and I thank you for that. But let's say that I'm a salesperson. I'm busy with all these KPIs and high volumes of activities, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
calls, meetings, emails to be sent. And there is also a lot of time restrictions nowadays because
Yes.
we multitask a lot. So we basically kill our effectiveness. So, what kind of activities should I do to be effective? Like a step by step approach. Let's say I start with a little bit of chunk of meditation, and then maybe it evolves into a practice that I do every day, every morning for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of like that?
Could be. Yep. A great way to start your day, because you know something else about meditation is that it helps you become comfortable with silence. And you've probably had the experience at least once to have a conversation in which there were some significant pauses in between. And what we tend to do is we want to jump in and keep talking. That's when we get into the rambling piece. We don't like silence. And to become comfortable with silence allows your speaker to get to a deeper level of what they really need from you, or what's bothering them, or what they really want. If you've ever had that experience, it's quite interesting. We definitely see it in the medical community. When we ask a patient, let's say, how are they doing? And we allow the silence, they start giving you pieces. And this goes for sales too. All this relates. The client, the customer, the patient will give you pieces of information. But if you continue to allow the silence, they will get to a deeper level. They will almost self-diagnose and give you all the information you need to move forward. But if we're always jumping in and we're not comfortable with silence, boy, we can really walk away with only a quarter of what that customer really needs. So that's why I'm so big on meditative like preparation for conversations you're going to have with your clients. The other thing is just to remember that when you shift into that movie mindset, when you say, okay, I have a kind of a difficult customer today, and I want to prepare well. I want to be able to get into their movie. I want to forget myself, my agenda, and just listen with rapt curiosity. I want to know what they really want. I'm going to be prepared for that difficult customer to be curious, non-judgmental, but curious about what irks them about the product, or if they have a complaint. I want to really understand what their experience was. Just like at the movies.
That makes
The
sense.
other thing, too, is to eliminate external distractions. If you need to know what's going on with the news, find out and then put it aside, and then consider that, okay, after these 2 hours of chatting with customers, that's when I'm going to go back to the news. But right now, I am going to be in the movie of my client. I'm going to give them as much as possible of myself in order to help them better. And that turns out to be such great benefit because you leave a conversation feeling like you've taken that next step towards the sale, or you've just enhanced the relationship. And that's what mindful listening is all about. It's all about creating a relationship. So, how you go into it affects how you come out of it.
That makes
What do you think of
sense.
that?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, honestly. And this brings us also to, let's say, another question that I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
based on a real case scenario. Okay. I'm in software sales, selling complex software to most of the time audiences, committees of buyers. Okay. So 5, 6 people in calls, maybe on the other side, and on our side, 2 people. And it's really difficult. And I find really difficult to dedicate the same quality of listening to all the participants on the other
Mhm.
side.
Mhm.
And the reason is that I think I don't know if it's based on the dynamics of power that we have to detect in order to, as you said, do the next step, which sometimes is also fuzzy and not that not that practical or not that effective. So first question, what kind of advice would you give me and all the other people who are in the same situation, like dealing with committees of buyers and remote calls? What kind of advice would you give us to really dedicate the same, not time, but quality of listening to all of them without falling into the trap of, let's say, this power bias?
Mm. Boy, that's a very interesting dynamic and quite one of the most challenging listening situations there is because this is all conference call. Is it a video?
Yeah,
Oh, it
mainly
is
video.
video?
Yeah,
Oh, you get to see people
yeah,
as you're having these conversations? Oh,
yeah,
well, at least you have the benefit of being able to read people and see, you know, um, that is challenging. It's important for you to set the stage to determine what outcome are we all shooting for here.
yeah,
Because that is a situation in which there's a should be a lot of listening to the customer. There should be a lot of observation as far as reading the room, also to understand who's the most powerful person here and what is my role in expediting this conversation or this sale. It takes 100% of your concentration and focus to be spread across all the people who are participating in that conversation. It takes restraint, and it's very big on listening to yourself. You
yeah,
get an opportunity to read that customer and to see if they are in the game. Are they engaged? Are they focused forward? Are they leaning in? Are they scattered? Are they looking around? Something's off when that happens. But it is a very difficult situation. Can you give me more? I'm
yeah.
trying to picture this.
Yeah, no,
Give
but
me a little
I
bit
think that
more.
you already kind of picked on something, like when you just said pique the interest of everyone. So what I usually do, let me give you as an
Mhm.
example and give me your feedback on this. Most of the time, if I see someone, switching off the camera and so on, I ask
Mm.
a question, even if not a deep question, but mainly tied to their job role or function and how they will use probably the solution. And I
Mm.
direct the question at them to, solicit their attention. So I don't know if this sounds good to you or might be considered, something that catches people off guard. How would you recommend this strategy just to, raise someone's interest and then offering listening according to their feedback?
Oh, I see. Okay, so you would propose a solution
Yeah,
and then you would encourage them to give you some feedback
yeah,
according to that solution, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, that kind of thing.
yeah. How they will use it, or maybe what's
Hmm.
their view on it.
Uh-huh.
These kind of even small hints or questions just to pique their attention if probably, as you said, one of them starts multitasking on doing something different.
Oh, right. You may have lost them. You know something? We are in your neck of the woods, but I think it's pretty universal. Customers tend to, not all, but customers that you're really trying to help can often be pleasers. And they'll say, oh, yes, this
Mhm.
sounds like a good solution. Then why don't you hear back from them
Yeah,
after a few weeks, right? And we can drop their defenses in other words, to get them to be more honest in the feedback by saying, I'm going to propose an idea here. I I'm not, wedded to it, but I am interested in hearing your perception of it. And then let's work together to work out the kinks. And I come out and I say this to my own clients. I want you to be honest with me. Tell me 100%. If you disagree with any aspect of what we're doing here, I want to know. I'm not going to take it personal. I want what's best for you and your company. When you set the stage like that, you'd be surprised how much more open people are to saying something negative about your product or giving you a criticism. And it's like a gift. It's like, this is very helpful. This is something we can work through. I think that has given me a lot of mileage with my clients, letting them know it's okay to disagree or to critique straight on what's wrong with the product or the service. Is that helpful to you?
yeah, absolutely. It's helpful for me and for my audience. Because
Feel
as
free
my
to disagree.
no, that was really good because I barely, I didn't think about the silent, let's call these objections or observations that a customer can have. Okay, most of the time, as you said, they're pleasers, but by, let's say, polarizing the questions, you kind of shake the whole conversation and really, I don't want to say but push, because it sounds like a tough word, but you really go for the most polarized observation from the most silent people who do, or those who appear to be the most silent. So thank you for that. That's a really good tip.
Good.
So I have one other question that
Sure.
is related to, let's say, kind of fil rouge from the various editions of your book. Because when the first one came out, it was 2000. And I think you started, my perception is that you started anticipating or understanding that we were going towards an age of distraction,
Hmm.
because I have both versions of the book. Okay. And when I read them, when I compare the paragraphs, those who are kind of, let's say, share the same fil rouge are really those based on you anticipating a time of distraction for everyone. And I see a lot of, let's say, commonalities among this situation. What happens nowadays with buyers, they interact always less with us because they do a lot of information by themselves, a lot of information gathering on internet, but
Mm.
also now with AI, the
Ugh.
amount of information that they do, that the information research that they do is really increased even more,
Mhm.
and so they come always prepared a lot, or they come in the course convinced that they're prepared. Okay.
Uh-huh.
The problem is what they perceive as preparation for me is confusion, but it's not only because I'm selling a solution and competing with others, but also because when you do all the research by yourself. You pretty much put together all the informations you can, and you come out with something that is scary for yourself. And it's easy when you have conflicting information from marketing sources
Mm-hmm.
of all the companies. You end up in, with the status quo. So you end up with the paralysis by analysis, and you realize that every change is too painful, every change is too risky, so it's better I stay with what I have. So in this kind of age of distraction, our job as salesperson is really to listen to the other person, redirect the idea to what path or solution can help them. But it's really, really difficult because there is a limit in the amount of information that they want to share, because they really believe that they have answered our questions with the
Mm-hmm.
research. You know what I mean? That they
Mm-hmm.
told with their computer, with their laptop, with their phone, with whatever. So we as salespeople, this is the situation, fall into the trap of forcing the conversation. We try to redirect it in maybe a strong way to push the buyer into our talk track, into our path,
Yeah.
way before we really make an effort to solicit an answer, as you said, like go for the answer from the most silent person in the room. So, according to this situation, other than meditation and so on, what kind of other advice would you give us to avoid pushing the conversation into our talk track in order to look, for the answers that we want to hear, and indeed establish, a safe zone for the people who talk with us and offer us their time to really, go for the right information that can be beneficial for them.
Tobia, that is a great question. And I may give you an unusual answer. There is a great salesman that I always like to read his books, Jeffrey Gitomer.
Yeah,
I don't you're familiar with his little red book on selling. It's really a good
absolutely.
one. Okay.
Still
What's the one?
legend.
It's a legend, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
One of the first things he says is from the outset, start to make friends first or don't start. And I say, well, wait a minute. Salesmen, they have time to sit there and make friends. And oh, yes, they do. What's very important is that you start off in order to get to a suitable outcome where both sides are happy with the sale. And there's no mystery about understanding the product, what it can do. All that has been cleared away. That's the end point. But creating a relationship and getting to know the person and really, getting yourself in their movie establishes the trust. And some of the best salespeople that I've ever known will say, hey, I'm building the relationship. I'm not going for the sale day one. I'm not going to push them into doing something that maybe might make sense on paper, but they don't feel comfortable with. And I said, well, good, because if you start off trying to cultivate that relationship and building that trust by listening to what they've experienced before, understanding why they're so overwhelmed with the information, why are they spending so much time trying to find enough information in order to make a decision? If you can establish a relationship first with that client to understand their needs, then step two is up to you. It's up to you as a salesperson to help distill all that information that the customers brought to the table, the information that you know, to help them make a decision. But they will never let you go to step two unless they have established with you some trust from the get-go. Then it's so much easier for them to hear you, to trust that whatever decision is made, they can feel comfortable with. But as you say, pushing the sale, jumping ahead, making them overwhelmed, and then, of course, with the lack of trust, well, that sale's not going to go anywhere if it does at all. So I would say set up that good connection from the beginning. Get to know your client before you even bring up your product. You can talk about things that are going on in the industry. You can, of course, hint at suggestions about what your product or service can do for them, right? To get them thinking, but also to establish that solid relationship so that they can trust you to distill the information they need to know to make a decision they'll feel good about.
You know what, Rebecca, and I thank you for the answer. Your answer makes me confirm that we are going back to basics, and basics in terms of back to when everything based in, sales profession and sales training started, which is pretty crazy if we think that we are in 2025. I don't know, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to the vice president of pre-sales in my company. So he's basically a guy who understands the solution, the architecture, the engineering, and so on. And I told him, look, man, I have to go for a meeting in Turkey because they prefer, based on, the how their society works, they prefer face-to-face
Sure.
face-to-face meetings before everything else. And he told me, he's a guy based in UK. He told me, Tobia, you know what? I will never buy a software from a person I don't see face-to-face.
Oh,
For
why
me,
is that good?
for me, it was revealing, And the other thing is, a guy, the CEO of a company called the Pavilion, they established a large community of sales professionals all over the world. He wrote a post and he said, look, now that technology can do pretty much everything in a click with AI, spend your salespeople time sending them out for meetings, make this
Mhm.
investment, it will pay off. So we are kind of flipping from, doing a huge amount of work remotely from doing the huge amount of work face to face and then handling the last phases of sales remotely. So we're basically
Mhm.
flipping it, And your
Yeah.
answer made me think about it, and I thank you for that.
That face to face. They even believe that there is some kind of, if you know anything about physics, that when you have that face to face, there is definitely energy between two people. And that is the energy that fosters a connection. So I'm all for the face to face. Yeah, it's a little more expensive, but I think it can save you a lot of time and money by taking those steps to meet people in person. Because even on video, you're trying to watch that person, you're trying to understand them, you're trying to establish a connection. It's not quite the same face to face as it is in person. So, yeah, it's a very interesting concept. And also, you mentioned something else that I wanted to bring up, and that is you probably speak, or do you? Maybe your audience speaks to people at different levels of technical knowledge.
Yeah.
Some could be as clueless as myself. I know enough just to be dangerous. But, to be able to adjust your language, your use of terminology, to pick up on the fact that maybe you've lost them in trying to describe a difficult kind of software, which is very difficult and very challenging to put into lay terms. But a really good listener, listening to himself or herself, is able to read that person and know how to speak to them, not as a child, but how to speak to them in terms that they can understand. If I ever have to talk to a lawyer or someone, I will come out and say, talk to me like a 4-year-old. Okay. I won't take umbrage. I will not, be embarrassed or something. I just really want to understand what you're talking about. So, sometimes you might interrupt the conversation with a customer and say, am I making sense here? Are you following me, or do I need to explain something a little bit better for you? Checking in to make sure that you are really engaging with that person's understanding, because they'll sit there and nod themselves senseless, giving you the false impression that they're with you and they couldn't be farther away. So that's just another little piece of that kind of face-to-face advice.
Can help. Yeah. Last question for you, Rebecca. Yes. Next steps. What are you working on now? Any new book that we can read? How's your practice evolving? Any speaking session and so on? What do you want to share?
Sure. Well, I am working on a book. In fact, it's almost done. I'm waiting to find a publisher right now, called The Courageous Core, C-O-R-E, Courageous Entrepreneur, 4 Core Skills and Routines that every founder needs to succeed. And it is directed towards entrepreneurs. And my coaching practice is about 75 to 80% founders, people who are starting up companies, maybe coming out from behind a screen to lead people, which is a very different skill set, if you can imagine. And focusing on things like emotional self-regulation. So, they have that sense of self-mastery. Before you start leading others, you better be able to lead yourself. Focus and follow through is another component. Communication excellence, which is a huge piece of being able to keep a startup going and thriving. And shark readiness, to be ready for the sharks. And the sharks come in all forms: investors, customers, competition. It's a very interesting approach to helping founders create a strong core foundation for their success. So that's what I'm working on now.
Oh, that's perfect. So let me know when you will find the publisher, when it will be out. I mean, I will buy it for sure, but maybe we can have another episode of the show and go and dive deep into the new book.
Sure. I would love that, Tobia.
Rebecca, so thank you so much for your time. It was like really a pleasure to have you on the show. And I think that all the audience will go home, if they're not already home, but we'll take a lot of practical insights and tips to apply in their day-to-day job. And I really want to thank you for that. I hope you enjoyed the show too. And I hope you found it, funny, engaging, interactive. But really thank you for being here.
It very much was. Thank you so much, Tobia. Let me give you my email and my website if people would like to get in touch with me for more. My website is www.mindfulcommunication.com. And if people want to reach out to me, they can do so at Rebecca@mindfulcommunication.com.
Perfect. And last one thing, you can find Rebecca also on LinkedIn. She's really responsive. She answers your messages. So drop her a DM and ask for, any type of suggestion you want. Thank you again, Rebecca.
Thank you, Tobia. A pleasure, and take good care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.